Welcome to We Have a Spiritual Problem, where we explore the deep interconnections between personal wellness, societal changes, and spiritual growth. My guest, Wayne Lehrer, is the author of The Art of Conscious Aging, an operating manual for an extraordinary third act, and The Prodigy Within, the quest to discover your life's purpose for late bloomers and other seekers. Wayne is an accomplished individual with a diverse and inspiring background. In this episode, we'll discuss identity and its ties to spirituality and mental health and well-being. Wayne will share his concept of an extraordinary third act and how this concept applies throughout the stages of life. Whatever stage of life you are in, this conversation promises actionable insights and inspiration that will guide you in your journey to finding identity and purpose as you seek to deepen your spiritual understanding. Well, Wayne, welcome to the We Have a Spiritual Problem podcast. I know some of our guests may have listened to you on my Aging Well podcast, and you were in episode 186 for that. And if they haven't listened, I want them to go back and listen to that one as well. But for those that maybe did not listen to that episode, can you just give a quick kind of overview of who you are and, kind of why we're here?
Okay, well, in 10 words or less,
You got 15.
I was on the other podcast because I'm 74 years old, healthy, alive, curious, interested. Just wrote a book called The Art of Conscious Aging and coaching people in making the transition from their second to third act. Kind of have coined the term the third act identity crisis, which is basically, and this is something that we'll get into, I think, basically a spiritual crisis for most people, because they're basically going from the material world of the second act to something a little more ephemeral that the third act represents. And, I've had a long, full life, and I'm in the process of reinventing myself, as most of us, as we get older, have to do, or else we end up falling into the Barco lounger with the remote control in our hand, So that's how I'm here.
Yeah, and I think for the listeners, if they familiarize themselves with you, they'll find that you probably reinvented yourselves numerous times throughout your careers. I mean, you've done so many different things, and I know your book is
That's
about the third act identity. And you talked in that previous interview about how you came to understand that you were kind of in an identity crisis when you were suffering from a bit of depression after retiring. What I'd like to kind of dive into a little bit is how that identity crisis really follows us through the various acts of life, not just in our third act, but we struggle, and I think it's a spiritual problem that we try to figure out who we are throughout our lifespan.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when we're younger, we're just sort of following, what's been laid out in front of us, either by our parents or by the school educational system, or by the media, and by our by celebrities and by those people that we admire, that we think have lived an interesting, credible life, or for many of us, just our desire to get enough money for our family, or maybe become famous, or whatever it is. And so I believe that in our earlier life, whatever it is that's been moving us forward, for the most part, is a result of necessity, in terms of being able to support ourselves and be able to support our families, and some degree of ego, and the need to prove that we're esteemable and to find our place in the world. And even though those are not perceived as spiritual actions, I think the spirit is working through those circumstances, certainly in our younger life. And as we get older and we've gone through a lot of those things, a lot of us arrive in our 50s, and I think the first time it happens in a midlife crisis in the mid 40s, where people go, well, what am I doing here? And then in the mid 50s, it's really like, have I created any real value? And wow, I've got 30 years left. What am I going to do? Maybe I've been doing something I never really chose to do. I just sort of fell into it. And life just kept pushing me along. I needed to take this job. I needed to take that raise. I got an opportunity over here. I needed to support my family, to keep my kid in a private school, because I had a knack at something. And maybe during that, for many of us, the Peter principle kicks in, and we raise to a level where we're no longer satisfied with what we're doing, because we've been given a raise to do something that's really not in line with our gifts or in line with who we are spiritually at all. And yet now we're sort of trapped in this identity, because we got to pay the mortgage and got to pay the school and have to feed the family and all of that kind of stuff.
So, how would you describe your spiritual or philosophical perspective, and how has that shaped your worldview?
Well, I didn't take a standard path. I never, I never took a job for money ever. Not that I can think of. I always just followed my itches and my curiosity. So, and I've always been driven by some sort of idea of spirituality. And even as a teenager, I mean, I'm part of the '60s generation, and I started doing LSD. I was like the first kid on my block, and I did it many, many, many times. And I did it because I was in love with this sort of spiritual experience that I thought it was a pathway through to, this other dimension. And I wasn't really comfortable in the physical world and wasn't really interested in most of the things in the physical world. So I think I'm very divergent from most people in that regard. I was a rebel and I sort of stayed a rebel the whole time, and not just simply to be rebellious, but I had really diverse interests. So, at one point I was growing algae, spirulina and chlorella. I was, mass producing them and finding the ways to grow them in 3 days to the highest degree of protein potency. And then, I made a medical machine at one point that I was going for FDA approval on. And just because I had an interest and I thought, oh, this will help people and, maybe I'll learn something from it. But I was more interested in that part of it. So I've been following the breadcrumbs my whole life. But yet I arrived at the same place, which was I got to a place later in life where I said, well, have I really, who am I really? Have I really created something of value? And I've been for the last 25 years, I've been teaching yoga and meditation and training yoga and meditation teachers, and so there was a great deal of spiritual sustenance from that, and creating a lot of value. I mean, there's a lot of people whose lives were directly impacted from our relationship and what I taught them. They went on to get a profession from it and be able to help other people, and yet I still arrived at a place later in life where I said, is this all there is? There's got to be something more. And I don't think really, I think for most of us, that's just the natural state of affairs. So if you look at the first act, it's like, okay, you're not going to live with your parents. I don't want to live with my parents anymore. I don't want to be dependent. I'm going to go away to school and I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm not going to listen to anybody. I'm going to explore drugs or taking weird classes that are outside of my major or getting jobs that are, whatever, as an opportunity just to explore. And we don't really know what we're doing, we really don't. I mean, we're just,
True.
my first book is called The Prodigy Within, The Quest to Discover Your Life's Purpose. And in that book, the premise of the book was that in each one of us is this thing I call the prodigy, that uniquely gifted quality that's who we are. It's our gifts, it's our interests, it's our curiosities, it's our hobbies, it's our tendencies. I believe that every job we've ever taken has nurtured it, fed it, and also some hidden hand has been at work there. Whether you call it God or a higher power or just that still small voice within. That hidden power has sort of been guiding us to the place. And so for me, that first book kind of led me naturally to the second book, this idea that, oh, well, all of a sudden I'm 60 years old and I really want to make a contribution. I really want to do something that's of value. And I've written this other book and I've already been moving in that direction. What is it that I need, that I can respond to in the world, that touches me, that I feel called to do? And I believe that that's one of the strongest spiritual principles that all of us have, which is how can I give something back? How can I make a contribution? How can I share my love with others? How can I share my gift with others in a way that that may help them or assist them or create value in their world? And I think that that's one of the truest, deepest, and most noble qualities of us humans. And I believe that if you're not completely burnt out and not totally living in fear, that when you hit your late 50s and mid 60s, that thing gets activated. That deep, noble calling gets awakened in you. And then of course, you just got to see, do you have enough energy left? Does your body still work good enough? Have you surrounded yourself with people? And do you have enough internal motivation left to move in that direction? And I believe, have you contacted some deeper place in yourself that's going to carry you through? Because society doesn't carry you through in the third act. the way it does. First act, you just lift your legs up and get swept along, right? The
Right.
job, the family, the kids, the house, the picket fence, the mortgage. Holy crap, how'd I get here? And the third act is like, well, what it all looks, what am I going to, and there's a whole stammering and stuttering that happens because there's no role models. Society has not really paved the course. We don't live in a culture where elderhood, where there's shamans and sages and elders and wise people that represent something noble that each of us would want to raise to the level of, if and only it included just starting a neighborhood victory garden that all your neighbors get to plant stuff in, and all of a sudden, you've created a community where people are being fed spiritually. That was a long answer, Sorry.
I like the long answers because then I just sit back and I have my wow moments and all that throughout this podcast. So do you think we're lacking the kind of elderhood, that, shaman kind of, person, or do we ignore them? What do you think's really going on in
That's
our society?
I think that's a really good question. I think, first of all, I think they're devalued inherently because society values success, money, power, celebrity, family. There's other positive qualities that it values, but it doesn't necessarily value wisdom. So, for example, what wisdom is experience that's been well digested, that put you through the ringer, that you rose out of the ashes of and became a lotus flower, right? That's what wisdom is. Well, a lot of people don't ever digest the life experience. So you see a lot of people in their 60s, and all they do is tell stories of what was, oh, back when I was, or, when I was doing when I was designing World's Fairs, and they become this victim of the life they've lived because they don't see what's in front of them. So I think that's one thing that happens. I don't think anything in society values it. I always use Jimmy Carter as an example. I
I
think,
was just
he's
thinking
somebody.
Jimmy Carter as you were talking there.
Yeah, he had one of the most noble third acts in the world, right? Habitat for Humanity. He probably did a lot more for humanity post presidency than he did, and it was all in his third act. It was all in a 30-year period or whatever,
That's
quite,
more
at
now,
least,
isn't it? Almost
yeah, at
50-year
least three
period.
decades, right?
Yeah.
And so, but he was still not necessarily valued for that. And I think we talked about this before, but like the cover of Art magazine, they celebrate people that are still doing second act things. So it says Tom Cruise, 57, and he still does his own stunts. Well, doing stunts at 57, that's a second act quality. That's not a third act quality. Third act quality is Tom Cruise. He's created a foundation that's going in and solving problems of malaria or he's started basketball camps for kids in inner city, or whatever it is that someone chooses to do. So I don't, and so we don't. Not only do we not have the people that are our second act role models, very few of them make that transformative change. I think Oprah has done a good job of doing that. And I think there are a few people. I believe Clinton did a great job doing it. But for the most part, and then there's people that have always lived third act lives, like the Dalai Lama or
Right.
Nelson Mandela. They always represented the qualities of community, cooperation, collaboration, giving back, creating value, serving others. All the things that I believe are third act qualities and character traits. So I don't think that we have role models. I don't think it's celebrated in the media in any way. I don't believe that most people think they can rise from the ashes. And some of this has to do just with where we are historically, which is you and I are the first people in history that have 30 years left in front of them at 60 or 70. Because at 60 or 70, I joked on your first thing, I'm sure I said this, but I always say, when I turned 60 and people said, how old are you? I said, the age that used to be dead when I was a kid. Right? That's how I thought about it. I thought about a 60-year-old when I was a kid as my grandmother, as wearing her stockings down around her calves and being overweight and waddling when she walked, and she's not doing. I mean, I can do a handstand still. I'm still a capable, able-bodied person, and in the ways I'm not physically able, I'm still expanding in new ways. And I think and so to sum up everything in answer to your question, I don't think that we've procured the belief in that there's essentially that anything can happen in your third act, and that it's a period of incredible hope. So I think this idea that we're still based on this idea of retirement instead of reinvention, recreation, rebirth, because that's the only way you're going to make it into your third act happy. You really do have to reinvent yourself. You really do have to be reborn. You really do have to recreate yourself. It doesn't have to be radically different. You can still be an accountant, but maybe now what you do is you volunteer at the local homeless shelter, and you get people, you help people do their taxes at the end of the year, and all their whatever it is, to get money back. And I believe that I just don't think it's been celebrated. I don't think that we believe that there's this huge future that can open out in front of us filled with possibilities, and I don't believe that society supports that. And I still have, I've released my book, and I didn't have any sales yesterday or the day before. I had sales like this out the first month and a half, and now it's out there, and my friend calls it the entrepreneurial hockey stick, where it takes off really good, it drops really fast, and then it's this long, slow incline. Well, I'm prone to depression. I'm prone to not believe that it's going to be good anymore. I'm not that 30-year-old that jumped in, and if I had a failure, I just kept saying, screw it, I'm going to go back for more. I have to dig deeper. I have to find, and this really speaks to your topic of this podcast. You have to really find your spirituality in your third act to make it through, because the society's not supporting it. A lot of your friends aren't around anymore or moved away. You're not at work anymore, so you don't have a culture that supports it around you per se. You may have a few friends, you may have a wife, you may have, a golf buddy or whatever it is, but for the most part, it's a little bit more isolated. But I believe that the third act is the time of interdependence. The second act is the time of independence. So if you're still trying to be independent in your third act, that's not going to fare well. So you really have to reach and find some kind of personal spirituality.
Yeah, and I think we also promote this idea that the third act, or they call it the third age going into the fourth age. It's all this. You have that expectation of decline. Physically, you're going to
Yeah.
decline. Your mental capacity is going to decline. Your belly's going to, your chest is going to sink into your belly, and all these different things. Everything declines, and I I really get bothered by that. Particularly from the Aging Well podcast we have. It's like I don't believe that we have to be in that state. But from a spiritual standpoint, we're basically telling people there's no hope, and that hope needs to be there.
Well,
And do
you
you
need to.
think, go ahead.
So I believe that it is very harsh, but it is a time of loss. That is not a negotiable, right? Your body's not working as well. It's working different, but it's not working as well. You're probably not earning as much money as you used to earn for most people. You may be on a fixed income. People are moving away in your world, and you're losing friends, whether they move away or whatever. And you're not in places where at a new job or at a new school where you're meeting, where you're constantly exposed. So there's a lot of loss there. Nothing has replaced it in the collective consciousness that's of greater value, that replaces this idea of, okay, I'm losing something, but what am I gaining? And that's the real issue. And that's a lot of what I talk about in the book, is finding that thing that you are gaining. And I believe that what you're gaining is all of your life's work, looking at it in a new way and saying, wait a second, it wasn't all for naught. It wasn't all for losing it and having it flitter away and move through my fingers. Now it's a time to bring it all together and to create, in the tradition of the alchemist, is to turn, iron into gold, straw into gold, is to fashion something of it that's of value. So yes, you've lost something. You might not move as fast, you might not sleep as well. Your belly may have swelled a little bit. I like that your chest sinks into your belly. I do this thing in my yoga class where I show life in 80 years in 2 minutes, and it's basically ga 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 goo goo, stand up straight, walk for a second, and then you know, and then okay, but how do I still stand up straight internally when loss has become a piece of life? And the only way to do that is to find a deeper spiritual connection, because that loss is very real. And that loss is accompanied by grieving, and we don't value grieving in this country either.
True.
Get over it. Get over it. Or oh, we understand that your mother died, and and you get a week off from work, or we understand it, but it's still like, I mean, I know I can be. My brother recently passed away, and there's 2 years between us, and we got very close in the last 4 years. And I was out walking on the bluffs here in Santa Monica, and I bumped into one of my friends who's an incredible empath, deeply spiritual person. And I told her my brother died, and tears came to her eyes. I was so uncomfortable standing next to her because she was feeling it more than I was willing to, and
Yeah.
that's who we are. And I think of myself as a deeply compassionate person. And I'd been grieving him dying for the 5 months where I was with him constantly as he went through this the path of his own, um, loss of life and health. And yet I was with somebody who was really feeling it, and it was a confrontation to me, and it just drove me back into the feelings. And I thought, oh, this is important. I can't leave this that far behind, and I can't leave it behind without really honoring it. And and here's the other thing: in other cultures, there's rites of passage. There's no rite of passage here. When you get kicked out of the job, no one prepares you for what might be next. It's like, okay, you're out on your own. Go to the golf course. You're
Yeah.
out on your own. Go have lunch with your lady friends. I'm not trying to belittle anybody, but that's what most people end up doing, as opposed to like go on a weekend retreat and look at the potential for life. I mean, I want to do these. I want to get 300 or 500 people in a room together that are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and say, let's create a new collective agreement reality about what's possible. And then let's be that culture that supports it for each other. You know, I watched in the 70s when EST happened. I don't know if you remember this. It was
I remember a little bit.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a growth based thing, and almost every executive in America, many executives in America did it, and the culture it created was unbelievable. People, believe that, and same thing, the culture that Tony Robbins creates, and there's been no culture created that has a belief system around it that supports elders. That's what you're doing. That's what your podcasts are about. You're trying to foster that. Hey, there are possibilities. There are other ways to think about that. There is a future worth exploring, embracing. And yes, there's loss, but there's a lot to be gained, and the gaining of it may not be without pain, and that's a big one for us too.
Now, do you think that as we kind of go, I mean, we have the first act kind of prepping for that second act, and in the second act, we just kind of do we lose our way, or is it preparing us for that third act, and we just haven't realized it yet?
Yes, both.
Both.
we,
That's the
yeah,
easy answer. We're supposed to give
I
you
think we
questions for
lose our
long
way.
answers.
I think we lose our way, and I believe we're being guided by this deeper force within us. Because I believe, if you look at the history of humanity, humanity has evolved. I mean, there's a lot of people right now that believe humanity is at a low point, but for the most part, we're smarter, we're faster, we're taller, we're more capable. There's a lot of that stuff that's happened, and there are a lot of people that are more awake than they've ever been. And many people coming back to that spirituality of being, part of community and collaborating and stuff. So, that being the case, I believe that there's been a force at work through the history of humanity. You call it God, call it whatever. I've simplified it. I call it the prodigy within, but I think it's that still small voice that says, "Hey, you can be more. Not just you can have more." That's one of the drives. And Maslow talks a lot about that. He says the first drive is you can have more, you can get more, you can succeed. And then the later drive, after you've gotten more, accumulated some stuff, become more, been acknowledged for that, then you can actually transcend that and begin to give more back. And so I believe that, yes, it's an unconscious process on one level, that we consciously participate in sometimes more and sometimes less. The more part is when we take a job seriously that we may not be passionate about, but helps us develop a skill set that we didn't even know we had. For example, when I first started, when I used to design museums and World's Fairs for a living, I'd have 200 people working on my vision. Or when I did an IMAX film, and I did not know that I was a really good leader, because I was really good at picking out people, choosing the people that were really good at what they did, and then just supporting them at what they did instead of being Miss Bossy Pants. And I didn't know that because I always thought of myself as a control freak. And yet when I did that thing, I was like, holy moly, I'm really respectful of people. I was only really respectful of them because I picked really smart, good people, which was another quality I didn't know that I had. Here I'm following a job, but in the process of following the job, I'm developing a quality that's going to come around full circle. So, for example, just before COVID hit, I was doing workshops in China on authentic happiness with 100 Chinese people in the room. And that skill, all the skills of my life were coming to play in that one 3-day endeavor. And it was amazing. So again, the answer is yes and no. We're being drawn along unconsciously. We're being drawn along on a superconscious level or a spiritual level. And then we're actually making some choices from that higher place. But I believe you got to get to a place in life where you then say, okay, that's what's got me here. Now, how do I co-create and create something out of all of that that is, simply put, an offering, something of value that I think is a life, represents a life well spent.
Yeah, I'm starting to think of it more of like a spiritual evolution. And I kind of started
Yeah,
out my spiritual journey being a geology major in undergrad and struggling with the concept of human evolution, physical evolution, and how that coincided with kind of my faith spiritual beliefs and realized that they can coincide. And now at this, as I near my third act, I'm starting to find myself now shifting gears to, okay, well, now there's not only is there the physical evolution of man, but man is undergoing a very dramatic spiritual evolution. And in order to do that, there has to be a certain level of friction and and cause for change. I mean, that's what drives physical evolution is,
right.
need for the species to improve in order to survive. And I think now we're at that cusp where the human being cannot physically evolve anymore. I mean, I remember at one point they talked about us evolving to have 6 fingers so that we can type better on the computers. I've not seen
Yeah,
anybody with 6 fingers yet,
yeah,
but from a spiritual standpoint, we're right now with this tension in our country and globally, the divisiveness. We have a choice of either coming together or falling apart, and so the only
yeah,
option is to come together and to have this spiritual growth. Again, whether you call it God or just the universe or whatever it might be, we're all connected, and we have to figure that pathway back together.
yeah. I saw a thing on the internet, a quote. I'm going to rephrase it very poorly, but it was attributed to Jane Goodall, and she basically said, if you're uncomfortable with the way things are in any part of the world that speaks to you, then pick the one thing that where you can make a contribution. Put your head down and put all your attention into that. And she's obviously this extraordinary example of that, because there is a place where we can make that difference. So that speaks to part of what you're saying. And the other part is, as you said, that sort of idea of what's the sand in the oyster shell, right? That irritates us enough to get us to grow. The premise of my book, The Art of Conscious aging is the sand in the oyster shell. My body can't do this anymore. That doesn't mean it's over. It means, like, what can, I've got to reinvent myself. I'm not working anymore. I'm not earning the same. What do I need to do to make ends meet that might have more meaning for me? I created value yet? All of these things, and I believe not only are we dealing with that individually, especially in the third act, people who actually have the wherewithal to make a huge contribution. A, because we were part of the people that screwed it up and broke it, and B, because we've got this extraordinary skill set. And finally, I don't know if you ever read the book, The Clan of the Cave Bear. Did you ever read it?
No, I've not read that one.
It was a great book. And the premise of the book was, it starts off with this young girl drifts away from her. She was one of the first Homo sapiens, and she got lost from her tribe, and she drifted into a camp full of Neanderthals, and she got raised by the Neanderthals. And as she was 6 and 7 and 8 years old, they all talked about her being, and she was played by Daryl Hannah in the movie. So she's this stunningly beautiful blonde, right? And they're all like big-headed, short-limbed, fat-muscled, and so they look. She's the ugly one, right? And in the course of the book, she then invents this sling, and she can kill animals 60 yards away. No one's ever been able to kill before, and she just invents all this stuff because she's this evolved being, right? Meanwhile, they're hating her. So I believe, and part of the premise of the book, and science has sort of corroborated this. You can tell me. I think it borders on geology. Science has corroborated this, that there was a leap, Homo sapiens sapien wasn't a direct evolution of Neanderthal. It's kind of sprung up somewhere else, sort of simultaneous. So Neanderthals were up to here, and they weren't really evolving anymore, and somewhere else Homo sapiens came up. Well, I believe we're in the same place as a species right now, and I believe that Neanderthals are fighting tongue and hand and fist to keep control. And there are people that are growing into the next level of our species. And those are people that truly, so the Neanderthal, and this isn't to belittle the Neanderthal, it's survival of the fittest. He who has the most toys he who dies with the most toys wins. Mine, ours, it's all survival based stuff. And I believe in the next stage of evolution, which I also believe is the third act for humans that make the transition out of the second act mentality. The next stage of evolution is we could call grace. What can I do for my fellow man? How can I ease someone else's burden? How can I share some of my skill set in a way that makes your life a little bit better? It doesn't even necessarily, I don't have to go into my bank account to help you to do it. I've got all of this other currency that I've created over a lifetime, currency of wealth, true wealth, right? That I can share and give back. So I believe we're there as a species. And right now I think the decision is being made on a personal level between the second act people and the third act people. And that's not even really age related, because there's a lot of 20-year-olds that are that are really looking at third act principles. It's almost wrong to call them the third act, but I believe humanity's getting ready for its third act. And the third act's always the best act in the play. It's where it all comes together. It's either where redemption happens or the bad guys just win everything, and we go away depressed, but it was a good movie with lots of carnage and bloodshed.
So when you hear the phrase, we have a spiritual problem, what's that mean to you?
Oh, wow. We have a spiritual problem. I think it's just got to do with what kind of choices do I make? I think it really boils down to that. The spiritual problem is, am I making choices that are simply based on fear, or am I making choices based on love? Am I making choices on the on the sympathetic nervous system of fight or flight, or am I making decisions based on, that there's enough to go around? That if we don't all make it through it together, we're not going to make it at all. So I think that's the true spiritual problem of our time. And again, we've never really been here before. I heard yesterday we're in the last. I might be wrong about this, but I think they said the scientists has said we're in the last 89 seconds of the 24-hour clock. So do you know what that is? This idea that humanity's been around 2 million, whatever it's been, years, right? And right now they've calculated we're in the last 89 seconds. Everybody's got to be on the same team if 89 seconds is going to turn the game around. I mean, I've seen some football games where I saw a basketball game with Kobe Bryant where we were 8 points down with 8 seconds left on the clock and he won the game. But that's pretty rare.
Right.
But if that's where we are, then everybody's got to start making a different choice. And I think that comes to that question, what's that spiritual decision that you're making?
Are you familiar with the book, The Fourth Turning?
I'm not.
And I can't remember who's the author of that. And it actually, my son had purchased it, and he had started reading it. And I wanted to read. I was looking for something to read when we went to Ireland, Scotland a couple of summers ago. And so I started reading it. And it's like, wow, this is really outdated, because it's like, I think it was about 10 years old. And most of what they were talking about was stuff that we should be at this point. And so I was like, well, there's got to be a new version of this book that kind of brings us up to date. And so it's like, it's titled The Fourth Turning is Now.
Here it is. It's called the Fourth Turning: What the Cycles of History Tell Us About America's Next Rendezvous
And it's a
with.
really fascinating, because it kind of, from a sociological standpoint, covers a little bit of what you're talking about. We go through these cycles, and where our generations are at. We have some of these people that are kind of, and again, I'm going to do horrible justice if I try and talk about all the four different generations that always stand kind of in the same time period, and they all carry different roles based on their experiences. As we went from like World War II to Korea to Vietnam, and we have all these crises that kind of cycle us through. So everything goes from a crisis to getting through that crisis and then the period after it, and it cycles back to the next crisis, and how we're kind of in that current crises at this point. And they say, that it's going to kind of come to its peak somewhere, between now and probably about 2030, according to, historical examinations of these cycles. And this particular crisis, as I'm looking at, is much more of a spiritual crisis that we've not had in the past. And it is going to rely on our younger generations that are much more empathetic and, more inclusive and just different personality than kind of our generation has been, right? And I don't know why I had to go down that pathway when I don't really know my way down that path, but it just kind of came to mind as you were talking about, kind of being at this point where we're going to be forced to either fix the problems or go under with them.
Right. And really, if not knowing about this book at all, but if there are four simultaneous generations, then really what we're talking about is that from each of those four generations, leaders have to arise. Leaders have to step forth that are championing that new spirituality, which is we're all in this together. If we don't do this together, we ain't going to do it at all. We've got it. We've got to start protecting our resources. Restoring the earth. I mean, there's so many things that are on our back. And if we collectively make that decision on some level, then there's a great deal of hope. And collectively is a weird kind of concept, in terms of, because we think of collectively as in the old tribal sense of the word, but collectively isn't tribal. It's group consciousness. It's a bunch of individuals coming to that and doing their part in that themselves. That's how they've collectively made this. That's how we need to collectively make the decision. You collectively did your part of it by starting a podcast to discuss this stuff. I collectively did my part of it by writing a book that hopefully helps people make a transition where they make better spiritual choices themselves. I have a best friend. She's brought rhinos back from extinction. That's her piece of the puzzle. And that's how we collectively make that decision. So it's not just a bunch of people with placards like we were in the 60s. It's now stepping forth as individualized sparks of God, if we want to put it that way, individualized spiritual co-creators that said, this is my piece of the puzzle I'm willing to be responsible for, and I'm going to do my best. That's what we need to do collectively. And that is the collective spiritual awakening. And I believe that's going to come from all of the generations that exist right now. There is the potential for it to come from the leadership. But we saw in the recent election, there was nobody really offering that on any level in
Yeah.
any of the any of the people running for the most part. No one's saying, wait a second, we need to work together, So, and I'm not besmirching anybody. I'm just saying collectively, where are each of us putting our best foot forward? Where are we claiming the ground that we're standing on and saying, this is the place where I've made my decision, and decision is an act of will. And the other thing about a decision that I believe is critical is you don't make a decision just one time. It's not like I'm going to stop eating sugar. I'm going to stop drinking alcohol. Well, I stopped drinking alcohol. I have to make that decision every day.
Right.
Every time I've ever stopped eating sugar, man, there were plenty of times that I made the decision unconsciously and just didn't eat it. And then there was times I made it unconsciously and reached for it because I wanted that high. To make the decision on a spiritual level it's a real act of courage, and it's a real act of will, and it is some ways no smaller act than what I forget his name, William, the guy in Braveheart, no smaller act
Oh,
than taking your army forth. It's major, and I believe that's the transcendental moment that Maslow talks about as self-actualization. For me to self-actualize, I got to make that decision to be who I believe I can be in every moment from this point forward. Wow, that's a big ask.
yeah.
And it's not that hard because we start getting payment for it. Like the payment I get for it right now is I get to talk to you, and I'm surrounded by a lot of people that are doing it too. So, we kind of all pat each other on the back, like my friend who's saving the rhinos, we pat each other on the back. She loves what I'm doing. I love what her doing. And, it gives me a little strength to keep doing it.
And I think that's where this whole podcast has evolved from, is this idea that all the problems we're facing in society are at their root spiritual problems. And the solution is going to be where we come together and realize the interconnectedness and how we each have a role and a responsibility in both the causation of the problem as well as the solution of the problem. And what are we doing to change that? We wouldn't have some of these problems in the world if people thought first about others, if they were more other centered and realized that they weren't the center of the universe, and their corporate profits weren't the most important thing. The life of somebody's child or grandparent or whatever it might be was more important than making the money or whatever it might be.
Well, and the assumption in that was, and this is, to me, speaks to the nature of evolution. When we were tribal, we naturally thought of everyone else because we were in a very close proximity, and one thing did hurt the whole tribe. Then we became families, and then we individuated. And in the individual process, it's me, mine, it's my, me, mine, I, me, mine. And that was a natural part of evolution. Then we got to get back to the whole, and the whole is no longer tribe, it's group consciousness. And I believe groups are made up of people that are, because in a tribe, no one's conscious. There is no separate self in a tribe. Everybody's just part of an ant farm. They're part of the hive. People forget that. They think that there's individuals in a tribe. There is no individual. You're functioning as part of this collective amorphous whole that's just there to survive and, keep moving, right? But as evolution has happened, we went from the tribe, and then families started breaking out of that, and then individuals moved to America and left their families behind. And then they mastered enough individuality that they had billions of dollars and buildings built to them and had success in whatever their field was, big and small. And then they got to the place where they actually said, oh, wait a second, I've done this and it's actually had a cost, a negative cost as well. It's cost me the planet. It's cost me friendships. It's cost me the rhinoceros. It's cost me this and that and the other thing. And then they were moved to give something back. So I believe we're just at that place right now. We've never really been here before. We were more caring about each other when we were in a tribe. We had to be. But as we separated, then we only cared about our family. Then I only cared about myself. And now I've cared about myself long enough and accrued enough, but I've also accrued enough gifts that now I can take those things and maybe do something to make the whole something different than the tribal level. And I believe that's the challenge in front of us is, are we going to wake up collectively by doing what each of us needs to do to contribute the tribe in the highest sense of the word, meaning we're all in this together. It's one little planet, And really, we could see the turning point of that is that first shot of the Earth during the moon time. That was the 60s, where tribal thing was what was happening,
Right.
And then all those 60s people went out into the world to make money. I was one of them, went out of money in the world, get famous. And now a lot of them are getting to the place and they're going, oh, well, how can I give back? How can I take some of my wealth, some of my genius, some of my gifts, some of my connections, some of what I've learned and do something?
And I
I
think we
could
might
talk
be
on.
kind of back to that tribal piece right now. But what that's done is it's put us back into these individual silos and divisions that don't function until now. We got to take all those tribes and those silos, bring those back together. We have
Well,
to go
that's the real
beyond the
question.
tribal.
Yeah, I mean, tribes are run by kings and chiefs. Groups are not run that way. Groups are run by a bunch of enlightened individuals coming together, bringing their gift and skill to a collective endeavor. And that's not to say someone doesn't take on the role of leader within a group facility, but that's only one of the roles, and all of the roles are seen as equal. I've worked on things like it. When I made this IMAX movie that I made, there were people, I couldn't have done it alone. There were people that did their part. And my only job was to just sort of remind them that this was the overall vision and let's keep moving in that direction. That was my job. My job wasn't to beat them into place. So, yes, I do believe that the temptation is to become tribal again because it's easier. It's so much easier than stepping forth and thinking on our own and making our unique contribution. And that's really, I think where we find ourselves spiritually and politically right now. What choice are we going to make? We gonna look for the tribe with the chief and the king and the despot and the oligarchy, Or are we going to find it of a democratic society where everybody's vote counts, where everybody's got a contribution to make? It's a big decision,
Yeah.
huge, because there's personal responsibility in it. I can't lay it off on mommy and daddy. Can't lay it off on the government.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge shift for us society wise to suddenly realize that we have to take responsibility for insert whatever spiritual problem we might be talking about. And I
Yeah.
teach my students the tragedy of the commons from a perspective of, healthcare and, universal health. And it's a bit of a shift for them to realize that, yeah, we might try and poo-poo the idea of personal responsibility because it's been so politicized, but the reality is, yeah, we do have to take a certain level of personal responsibility, but we also have to kind of give back and, do our part to further society.
Well, and that's such a good example of where we are historically, because right now, I have a chapter in my book that says, your doctor is not your higher power. We're at the first time, we're really also at the first time that, yes, on one level, we're giving all of our power over to the doctors. And at another time, I can go Google something and find out as much as my specialist may know in it, enough to make a decision about a specialist in another field that may have impact on it, or some way to deal with it holistically. And I'm not saying that's always going to be the case, but I think that we're in a place now where there's lots of answers available to us, and not just one from the king, one from the authority figure. And we're still tempted to live that way, and that's not going to serve us. It's not going to serve us on. I mean, as a senior, if I just did everything my doctor said without looking into it and talking to other friends about it, and I just got one of my best friends is one of the top holistic uh, cancer doctors in the country, and he just sent me a thing on one of the medicines I take for. I have uh, my heartbeat is arrhythmic. I have AFib, and so he sent me a thing on that, and it's like, and he sent me to a Google, a YouTube thing on. I could look it up and go, oh, well, if I take it along with this, then all of a sudden, my doctor didn't tell me that. He didn't know. So we're in a really kind of a cool place, but we have to become co-creators
Right.
across the board. That's the spiritual decision. Not to give my power away, and at the same time, not to try to rule everybody else and become a victimizer, not to be a victim or a victimizer. And that's putting your thumb in the face of 2 million years of evolution, to step out of the game of victim and victimizer.
So, do you see any connections between spirituality and the lack thereof, or the lack thereof, and issues like mental health, social isolation, and a lot of the polarization that we're seeing in the country today?
Wow. Yes. But again, I just think it's where we are for the first time in history. I think it's this idea of, like, we've now got enough information to make intelligent decisions. We've got enough information to help our fellow man. If we're talking about, for example, mental health or something, is it chemical? Is it genetic? Is it nature? Is it nurture? You know, all of those things we now see play into the role. So what is that? How does a healthy society set itself up that it's likely that you're going to have less problems in that regard? Well, that's got to be made by a bunch of collective people. That's not simply by writing laws or by stamping down, this is the way you're going to do it. So I think, again, it's the same thing. It's like, it's this question of collective, what's best for the collective, and also personal responsibility. Yeah, I just don't think we've ever been here before.
Yeah. So, along that lines, what role do you think concepts like compassion, forgiveness, and mindfulness play in solving what might be described as spiritual problems?
Well, look, we do know, as a matter of course, that meditation increases compassion, gratitude increases happiness and connectedness. Um, you know, doing kind deeds makes you feel better. There's a bunch of simple things that we can do. I have a chapter in my book called Authentic Happiness, and I've come up with the 13 gifts of authentic happiness, and they include things like gratitude, small acts of kindness, meditation on a regular basis, finding balance in your daily life, So these are all, I mean, they're all basic spiritual principles. I mean, they're why people went away into the mountains to live alone, hopefully, was create a balanced life, was to not put trash in their bodies and trash in their brains. Like this assumption that I can eat an organic diet and then stay on YouTube or Facebook all day long and fill my head with that other crap and not be impacted by it. Um, and that thinking is pervasive across the board. So, anything that's going to increase that compassion and that loving kindness towards one another. So, yes, I think any kind of spirituality that we can support, whether it's meditation or AA meetings or, churches, whether it's like all the people that gathered together for the fires here in LA. I mean, I have 30 friends that have lost homes. Almost every one of them looks like a spiritual giant when you talk to them right now because they're all in acceptance. They're all looking more at what they can do for others. I mean, I'm blown away. I just think I'd be reduced to ashes myself had it happened to me. And I'm only a mile from the fire here. And yet I'm watching these people that have come through this thing, and it's brought the best out in this entire community. And hopefully, we can all wake up to the fact that we are there collectively on every level. You don't need a fire in your backyard to recognize that we got 89 seconds left on the Earth clock.
Yeah, it's
The
those kind of
fire's
events.
really close.
I think it's those kind of events that kind of turns the lens back on ourselves. And yeah, you think you wouldn't be like them, but how how little I know of you. I mean, the conversations we've had, I can guarantee that if you had lost your house, you would be equally as supportive of others as others
One
are
one
being.
could only hope.
Well,
You
and
know,
then
one,
that's where we should be. We should be looking at ourselves as I don't see myself as good as those people. I wouldn't be doing that. I mean,
yeah.
but push come to shove when we get in those situations, most of us that are thinking that way probably will be that way.
Yeah. Well, and this brings us back to the beginning of our conversation, which is that I believe that the pressure of going from a second act to a third act, from going from a body that works to a body that doesn't work as well, from going from a place where you have great earning potential to a place where you have less earning. I believe that that is the sand in the oyster shell, and the people that experience it that way do rise to the occasion. In the same way that I believe that those among us that say, there are real problems happening on this planet. There's 89 seconds left on the Earth clock. What am I going to do? Are no different. And so, me being responsive to that was me writing a book. Partially, of course, I'm not saying I didn't do it for reasons that have nothing to do with ego. I want to be famous. I want to be able to have money, into my retirement. I want to be able to be acknowledged as a thought leader. But at the same time, I really I want to make a contribution. I know what feels good along the way is talking one-on-one with people and knowing that there's value that's transmitted there is by working with somebody on a coaching call where they actually get a vision of what they could do with the rest of their life, or they get relieved of the grief of where they're at because they are actually given permission to have it, or so it's all those small acts that come as a result of that decision that I made that may have been half ego, higher spiritual principles. But we're all there now and we have to be responsive to that. So whether it's an age related thing, which I believe what is it? There's 70 million people in this country that are confronted with the age related opportunity to grow spiritually. That's called the baby boom generation. And, the fact that there is there's an end date in sight. There's a date where the milk is no longer going to be good in this container. You know.
Yeah, we're beyond the best by days. We're now to potential expiration dates.
And with that in mind, what works? Put it in the refrigerator. There's lots of things you can do to keep it lasting longer. It's not going to not. You're not going to not die. You're going to die. Let's take that off the table. I've been asked on these podcasts before, and I talk about it in the book. Is listen. One of the greatest gifts you're going to get is facing the fact that you are a mortal being and you're not going to live forever. That is a big impasse for many of us. When we finally go, wait a second, I've got a lot less days left in front of me. I can see from the way my body's responding that things don't come back as fast or may not come back at all. Owning that there is a more date, there is an end date, has been a great incentive to me, and to the most of the people I know that have really stepped up into their third act is like, okay, do I have enough time left to do what I want to do here, to make the contribution I want to make? I'm a little scared of irony, you know. Wait a second, I
Yeah.
worked so hard to get here, and now, you know.
So with that in mind, what practices or tools, whether spiritual, secular, or scientific, do you believe can help individuals or communities address spiritual or existential struggles?
Um, well, I think one of the most important things is being part of a community of people that are finding ways to give to each other and to give back. Because when the best way to stop being a heroin addict is stop hanging out with heroin addicts, and the best way to become an enlightened person is to hang out with other enlightened people. So that's a kind of a that's the simplest thing you can do. The other tools are a regular meditation practice, time spent off of the grid, off of the phone, out of the story, where the culture is not pushing more stuff in, and where you're letting everything settle. I always equate that to, if you took the muddy Mississippi, and you put it in a glass and you let it sit for 20 minutes, there'd be 7/8 of the water would be drinkable and the rest would be all at the bottom. That's how simple meditation is. You don't need to be advanced. You just need to take time every day to let all the garbage in your head settle out, and and not be putting new stuff in. So that's another thing. They've proven with, tons of scientific inquiry at this point that the single biggest mover on the needle of happiness is feeling gratitude. And I've been writing a gratitude list for 8 or 9 years and sending a copy of it every day to one person, if not to more people. And there's a bunch of people that send me theirs, and I read them because they'll be grateful for something I haven't thought of, and I thought, oh yeah, and to I have a saying, one of my little fortune cookie sayings is, when you walk in gratitude, you live in grace. Because when everything you see that comes your way, you find a way to be grateful for it, even things that look adverse, it turns them into opportunities for, in the worst case scenario, opportunities for spiritual growth. Healthy community, meditation, gratitude. I believe the most important thing that you can do when you're older, really, really work hard to create a balanced life. You need to do what it takes to sleep well, to eat as good as you can possibly eat, to do the things that are good for you, to exercise an efficient amount. Because if you can at least show up at your highest level, not at the level you could show up at the 30, but the level that's the maximizing of what you've got now, you've got a lot greater chance of both making a contribution, being around long enough to enjoy it, but also being happy on a day-to-day basis, because you're not sending constant texts into the complaint department. So balance, gratitude, healthy community, and and finding a lifestyle that works, and then ultimately, looking for the way to give back. Because one of the highest values, and this is what Maslow talked about, that I just thought was so genius, is this idea that when we've gotten enough, when we've reached a certain level, something goes off in us, and it's the next level of need, which is, I need to create value. I need to feel proud of myself. I need to give something back. I always say, if you want to be happy, you need to be valued, know that you're valuable, and create value. And if you can do those three things and know that you're doing them, you've created a lot. And those are all, to me, those are all spiritual endeavors. A balanced life, gratitude, creating value, and being a part of a healthy community. It's pretty good. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to do much damage if you're doing all of those things. And it's
Yeah.
pretty likely that you're going to improve your quality of life immensely.
So have you started spelling gratitude with two T's like I've been pushing?
No, I've never heard of that.
Oh, I thought I talked to you about that. Yeah,
Maybe you did.
I'm on a soapbox
I'm
to
old. I
change.
didn't remember.
Yeah, I'm spelling on the soapbox to spelling gratitude with two T's because it's an attitude of gratitude.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
All right.
getting people to kind of live that way.
I'll buy in.
So you got to
Yeah, but
call back
it,
all those editions of your book and change every word of gratitude to having two
I'll
T's.
I'll just take them all out, and I'll take a pencil and put it in
There you go.
everywhere that it is in the book.
You can just put it in the next edition, the next book.
Yeah, maybe that's a good title. Maybe that's the title for your book.
Yeah, if I can ever find anybody who will publish anything that I say. So maybe
Well,
eventually. I would like to
I,
do that someday, though. So, are there ways that we can bridge the divides between people with different spiritual and philosophical perspectives to work toward shared goals?
Wow, that's such a beautiful thought. I think, yes, I think if we're doing things based upon, see, if we're doing things based upon beliefs, it's likely that we're going to clash with others. In other words, if you're motivated totally by a belief or by an ideology, but if you're doing it because it's the right thing to do or a good thing and the outcome's going to be good from it. Now, I know that could sound, I mean, you could argue with me that, but we know that the rhinoceroses dying off on the planet is not a good thing. And so there's not a lot of political conversation. There's different ways that different people in different politics would do it. But if you've got a common goal with somebody else and you've seen that these common goals are important, then there's a place for discourse in there, and there's a place for also for um, uh, not agreeing with everybody else. So I think that that's the most important thing. So I think when we pick the thing that we're going to do, if we're open to the fact that in order to accomplish what I want to accomplish, so if I want to do workshops that 300 to 500 people come to, I'm going to have to work with somebody who runs workshops because I don't do that. I just stand in front of the room. And that person's going to have ideas about doing that. And in that stuff, because we have a common goal, we can come to a place where we go, well, they can have a strong feeling about something, and then we find a way to do it, and we find some level of um, uh, agreement, some place where we can agree about it. So I don't know that, I mean, I just don't think there's any way to institutionalize agreeing with other people, institutionalize this idea that we should all be on the same page about everything. I think what we need to do is find worthy things to put our attention on and then look for the best way to, look for a way to accomplish those. But if we're basically have completely different points of view on an issue, then there's no way that politics and ideology aren't going to come in. And as long as politics and ideology are there, politics and ideology are the terrain and the ground that people stand on that still live in survival of the fittest. My ideology, my belief is better than yours. People that don't stand on that ground anymore trust that there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. There's a lot of ways to solve a problem. And so they come to it with this group consciousness thing as opposed to my tribe against your tribe. We're the guy. God's on our side only. How can God only be on everybody's side and not be, on their side and their side and their side and not be on everybody's side? That doesn't, it's just works against common sense. So I think picking the thing again. I think picking our battles, picking the place where we can make a contribution. I'm sure there are ways that people have argued with Jane Goodall about saving the mountain gorillas that she gave into, and there's other times when she didn't. And yet she's had this extraordinary impact.
Yeah.
And that process of hearing each other is the place where we grow. That disagreement is the thing that becomes the terrain of spiritual growth. It doesn't happen without the disagreement. It's like us disagreeing and one of us going and one of us moving a little and opening up and being a little more accepting and thinking that maybe that's possible. That's my spiritual growth. If I don't do that with you, I'm not going to grow spiritually. I'm just going to be some magnanimous guy who's either giving it all up or demanding that it go my way.
Yeah, it's that grain of sand in the oyster again. That the key is we have to recognize the common goals and then accept the fact that we're going to be different and realize it's the tension in those differences that stimulates growth. Because if we
Yeah.
all need the same thing, we're just going to likely, if we grow at all, we're growing in the wrong direction, or we're not we're not changing. And you need to change. Change is growth.
And if you're not on the same I mean, a really good example of it that's naturally political is this idea of climate change. Well, almost every scientist on the planet has agreed this is a phenomenon. They may all agree, may have a different opinion about whether we're on the 89th second or there's still 2 hours left. It's pretty much general agreement. So within the realm of that general agreement, but there are people that are in denial of that quote unquote fact, and as a result of that, it's a political issue, and there's war, and there's disagreement, and there's ways that it's going to be dealt with that are going to hinder one side and value the other. But if people come together, if the most of the people believe in something, I mean, that was the big deal about going to the moon. That's what John Kennedy said. It was the right thing. He got everybody on the same page, maybe for the first time in history, probably the first time in history, and this extraordinary goal was achieved, because everyone was on the same page. Was there politics in there? You bet there was. Was there disagreements about how to do it? You bet there were. Were there moments when it wasn't going to happen, where they were too far off course, or there wasn't enough, the fuel calculations? Yeah, but we were all on the same page. And I think that there's hope in that thing. And if we can come to some agreement, if enough of us can agree, about some of these issues, and also keep our nose down and really focus on the one we can do. Because if I'm worried about everything else out there, I'm ineffective here. And worse than that, I am spiritually unfit. I am spiritually unfit if I'm worried about every other thing out there, unless that's my gift in the world, unless I'm Martin Luther King Jr. If that's not my gift in the world, then I'm spiritually going to be unfit if I put my attention on all the other issues that are out there, instead of like saying, I can move the needle a little right here.
And we got to get to that point of unity too. I had the thought this past week that, how did I phrase it? It's just kind of one of those aha moments where it was like, if your faith is creating division, you're worshiping the wrong God. Because, if we're
Amen.
talking God, universe, spirituality, whatever, it should be bringing everybody together, because that's what spirituality is. That's what faith is. That's what, you know, God is, if you want to, however you want to. And I always spell God with capital, all capital letters, because God is beyond my comprehension of what God is.
Yeah.
And, I have my perspective of it, but your perspective is going to be a little bit different, and somebody else is going to have a little different perspective. The reality is he's probably the collection of all of those
Yeah.
realities. But if we sit there and use it to divide ourselves, we're not getting anywhere.
Well, and what we do know about God, and the simplest thing is, and everyone can agree that this, God is a creator.
Right.
So if we're creating, we're being godlike. If we're being destructive, we're not. I mean, I think it's pretty much that simple. And that doesn't mean there isn't some teardown to create something new. But
Right.
there's got to be with the intention that it's to create something new.
And we had that conversation in episode 1 when I was, chatting with Lauren Axelrod, who kind of inspired this whole "We Have a Spiritual Problem" podcast. But
Wow.
that there has to be that kind of friction in there. And even like when we look at the evolution of our geology, that we wouldn't have the Grand Canyon if it wasn't for that destruction
Right.
that was creating. And there has to be tearing down in order to build up.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of step into that and figure, okay, what do I have to personally tear down so that the greater can build up?
Well, if we get back to my personal part of this conversation, one of the big things that I talk about in my book is to make the transition from the second act to the third act, you got to give up your second act story. That thing that you've defined yourself as for 40, 50, 60 years, you've got to give up it being the only thing there is in the universe. You can't just keep telling that story forever. Yes, there were great moments. What's out there in front of me now, And so, and as we said, there's going to be loss. In other words, the body's tearing down. I've got to be in acceptance of that. So for there to be real growth, for us to make a healthy, successful, happy transition into our 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, we've got to let that tear down be part of it, let that destruction be part of it, and embrace what can be created within that and from that.
I think you just kind of answered my next question, which was going to be, what's one piece of wisdom or insight from your own life or work that you believe can help others address spiritual challenges? And I think you just kind of stated that, but you have any other answer to that one?
Yeah, I think becoming yourself, becoming yourself. Like so many people, I have so many friends I know. I'm in a bunch of different groups where people are very self-reflective and, sharing and talking in very personal ways. And I can't tell you how many people I know that are our age that say, I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up. I don't know who I'm going to be when I grow up. I mean, it's like, and the joker in you says, yeah, it's a little bit late, right? And the honest party is it's a good time to figure it out. It's not too late. Figure it out. And it isn't that far away. You've been doing all of the work up until now to put it all together, and all the pieces are right there. All you need to do, and this goes back to one of my favorite My favorite modern myth is the Grail myth and King Arthur and the Holy Grail. And Parsifal is sent to find the cup of destiny, the Grail cup. And when he finds the cup of destiny, that thing that's going to save humanity, because the earth has all fallen to, pestilence and starvation and the plague have all taken over in England at this time. When he's told that when you get to the castle where the Grail cup is and it comes out in front of you, you only have to ask one question, and that is, what ails thee, humanity? Or how may I be of service? How may I be of service? That's how I drink of my own cup of destiny. What can I do? How can I be a part of the solution and not, you know, in denial of it or part of the problem?
So, for our listeners who are struggling with their own sense of purpose or meaning, what's one small step that they can take today to start addressing this?
Call somebody you love, tell them you love them. Sit down right now and write a list of all the things you're grateful for. I'll tell you one other step. This is a little bit bigger step, but it served me really well. And it's a weird thing to do. But I had a friend told me to do this. I wrote a list of every win in my life. And it turned into 120 things. Things as small as being able to brush my teeth every day, and as large as, making an IMAX movie. And having a granddaughters, right? So it was 120 items. But what was interesting out of that was I saw the hand of God working through each one of those things to make me the man I am today. All those wins were a little step along the way to some final amalgamation of rightness, goodness, appropriateness, presence.
So, this podcast to me is harder to end than my Aging Well podcast. Because remember, with the Aging Well podcast, I always and keep aging well. But, with this podcast, I just kind of got to let it go with that profound moment from my guest. And I'm just going to kind of leave it with that and just hope that our listeners will listen to this podcast and take these steps and, be good to themselves and be good to one another.
Amen to that.
So, Wayne, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today, but I also want to give you the opportunity to plug your book for our listeners. We'll certainly leave a link to that in the description notes, but where can they find the book, and what can they expect to find when they get the book?
Thanks a lot. The book is called The Art of Conscious Aging, and it's a guide to happiness, health, and purpose in life's third act. And that's what they can expect to find when they get there. They can expect to find basically an operating manual for making the transition from your second act to your third act, and then an operating manual on how to live your third act to the highest and best level. Also, my previous book, The Prodigy Within, is also available for those of your listeners that may want to really take a look at what how to find their life's purpose. That book was called The Quest to Discover Your Life's Purpose for Late Bloomers and Other Seekers. And that's really goes with this whole idea of the spirituality being the fulfillment of your purpose and finding that. Also, you can go to my website, www.waynelehrer.com. You can follow me on all of the social media things, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And if you go to my website, there's a download available there called The 13 Gifts of Authentic Happiness. And it's a simple 8-page document, but it's actually the protocols for living in answer to that question of what can you do on a daily basis. Simple little things that you can do every day that move the needle on happiness. So so the book is available on Amazon. Again, The Art of Conscious Aging, and my website, waynelehrer.com. Thanks for the opportunity of being here. It's been a total joy and a completely enlivening conversation. I'm glad that this conversation gets to be heard by others, and they can enter into the dialogue themselves.
I love having you on my podcast and love chatting with you, even if it's not on a podcast, but this gives you an opportunity to kind of talk about the books a little bit. And I'm excited for the work you're doing, and just keep doing it, man. I love it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here.